So it's now been 3 weeks since the Boston Marathon. I've just made myself a coffee and I'm going to sit down and do a bit of a race recap. I'm going to talk through everything from before the race, the training I did, the changes I made in the preparation before this marathon, and finally go over the race itself, talk you through my strategy, my execution on the day, and the reasons why I think it went so well for me. If you haven't seen the vlog, I ran 2:24 for a new PB. My previous PB was 2:28, so I knocked around 3.5 to 4 minutes off, which to do on the Boston course I was super happy with, and to be honest with you, I'm still on cloud 9. Incredible experience over in America, and one I will never forget, especially being my first world major. But let's jump into it. Let's start with the before, and I'll talk you through some of the changes I made in the preparation. But if I cast myself back a little bit to the start of the block, I actually ran another marathon, the Osaka Marathon, in February, and then I jumped into training for the Boston Marathon. So after Osaka, I ran 2:28, and a little bit of a brief summary of that race. It went pretty well. I was hoping to run a little bit faster, but given the circumstances, I was a little bit jet lagged, or quite jet lagged. I only slept like 2 hours the night before, and the build up around in the taper was very busy, so I knew going into the race I wasn't going to be quite in top condition to execute a really good marathon, and I struggled a little bit towards the end, and I come away with 2:28. At the time I was really happy with it, but I knew that I could run a little bit faster, and I'd already put in a really good training block for that marathon, so that was sort of in the bank before I started training for Boston, if that makes sense. So post Osaka, I took a full week off to let my body recover, and then I jumped into a new training block with 2 weeks in Kenya in a 10, which I think was a great start to this new training block. Gave me a really good kickstart. Obviously I still had a lot of fitness from that Osaka block, and I carried that over into the Boston Marathon block. But I was keen with this training not to focus too much on overall volume. I'd already done a lot of base building previously. I was just going to focus mainly on getting some really good sessions, hopefully keeping the body in good shape to then go on to Boston and run something a little bit faster, which is what happened. So being in Kenya in a 10 was a great experience and a really good start to the training block. I sort of just built back into training gradually. I think the first week back I ran 80 kilometers, then 120 kilometers, and then in the 4 weeks after that back home, I was just dialing in my marathon pace sessions to get ready for Boston. So nothing crazy in this training block, but I would say I focused on getting some really good sessions banked. As I've said previously, I made sure that I trained with some people that were faster than me during this period. One of the key sessions I did was with Nick Bester. We did 15 by a kilometre down in Battersea Park, and I also did some other good sessions such as 7 by 3k. I did some really good work on the treadmill, like 10 miles at marathon pace, followed by 4 miles at half marathon pace. And these were the key sessions that I think really set me up for a good run out in Boston. They sort of topped up my marathon fitness. I built on that base that I'd built before the Osaka Marathon, and I just made sure that I was ready and as prepared as possible for tackling the 42 kilometers out in Boston. So that's a little bit about the training I did before Boston Marathon. Nothing crazy. I think I topped it around 140, 150 kilometers, and then I had like a nice taper in. Probably about 10 days before the marathon I started my taper. So relatively short, but I knew that the training block hadn't been massive, so I hadn't built up too much fatigue in the legs. The 2 days before the race, I remember doing just 2 super easy 5k jogs, just to make sure that on race day I was very fresh, and that's something I would definitely do again. Combine that with a few strides and I felt great on race day. But in that 7-week period before Boston, I also made some changes, 3 main changes. The first was nutrition. So having spent 2 weeks in Kenya eating quite basic food such as rice, pastas, lots of vegetables and quite clean meats and stews, I was keen when I came back to the UK to continue eating healthily, and I basically cut out all of my bad snacking habits. So previously I would just quite commonly go down to the shop, in the reduced section there'd be like a 6-pack of donuts, and I would purchase the donuts and end up eating all 6 in the same evening. So I tried to cut out my bad snacking habits. Some of the success from Boston came from cleaning up my diet, and that is something I'm going to continue to do moving forward. I will say, for me personally, I'm one of those people that can't really do things in moderation, especially when it comes to food. So for example, if I buy a bar of chocolate, I'm going to eat the whole bar of chocolate. I'm not one of those people that can eat like a row of chocolate, put the chocolate away, and then eat some more the next day. If I buy crap food, I tend to eat it straight away. So I've tried to clean that up, and I think, yeah, that really helped going into Boston. Another big change I made was core workouts. Again, something I learned in Kenya. I've been doing 30 to 45 minute core workouts ever since leaving Iten. So in the 6 weeks before Boston, I was really strengthening my core, and it's something I've been meaning to work on for a long time. In the marathons that I have done in the past, my core always seems to fatigue and be the sort of deciding factor that slows me down in the later stages. I get some cramps in the sort of side of my abs, the obliques, and I have done in the 3 previous marathons that I ran before Boston. But with Boston, had no cramping whatsoever, and core-wise, I felt super strong all the way to the finish. And I think these ab workouts that I added into my training really helped strengthen me up, and yeah, allowed me to sort of achieve the pace that I wanted to run for the full 42 kilometers. If you want to see some of the exercises I do in these core workouts, there's a video online that literally filmed one of the Kenyan classes that I was in. I didn't actually film the video, but I'll leave a link down below, and it's a 45 minutes session that you can follow along with. I do that most weeks, and yeah, it's really challenging, but it definitely makes you strong, and again, one of the factors that led me to such a good time in Boston. And the final change I just touched on was the marathon workouts. I really focused in on prioritizing those over anything else in my training. So for example, if I had 15 by a kilometer, a really good marathon session that I would definitely recommend giving a go. In the 2 days before that, I would make sure my training was really easy. If the day before I was feeling fatigued, I made sure I did a really light recovery run so that when it came to the marathon session, I could get the most out of it. And moving forward, that's definitely something I will do. And also training with others really helped. If you train solo, it's quite easy to sort of back off when things get hard, but if you're training with somebody else, it really helps push you onto that next level. So again, it's something I will take forward. So that's a little bit about the training, the changes I made in the preparation before Boston. Let's talk about the race itself. So going into it, I'd already PB'd in the marathon this year, so there was sort of a no pressure feeling, and going into Boston there was no sort of time pressure that I'd set myself. I knew the course was going to be quite difficult with the Newton Hills area, Heartbreak Hill. Everyone knows that Boston is not necessarily a fast course with those challenges in the later section of the race. So going into it, I had very little pressure that I put on myself, and I think that reflected in my attitude going into it. I was very relaxed, probably the calmest I've ever felt going into a marathon. It was my 4th marathon, so I think knowing what I was getting myself into also helped. Like, I know how far a marathon is now. Obviously it's 42 kilometers, but you know how things should feel at certain stages. So going into the race, I was super relaxed, super chilled, and I think that really helped get the best out of me on the race day. So the race itself also went pretty much close to perfect in terms of execution for me. On the day, it was quite rainy, the conditions weren't ideal. There was a slight headwind, not really that noticeable, I must admit, maybe around 10 miles per hour. But there was a little bit of a headwind, Boston being a point-to-point that did slow some people down, or the elite athletes down. It wasn't a quick day to run a fast time on the Boston Marathon course. But that being said, for me, I ran a new PB of 2:24. I couldn't be happier with how the race went, so let me talk you through it a little bit. The first sort of 8 kilometers of the race is all downhill, quite steep downhill actually. I hadn't really anticipated it being that steep. I can remember feeling in the opening kilometers that something didn't quite feel right. I was sort of swinging my arms, and it felt like, I don't know, the best way I can describe it is my arm drive didn't feel natural. And I thought it might be because I had a belt on that was carrying my gels. I thought maybe consciously I was carrying my arms a little bit higher, so I didn't sort of brush against the gels on my waist. But it turns out, sorry, that's the coffee. Cheers. But it turns out it was just the course. There's such a steep incline, it feels quite unnatural running at a marathon pace, or probably faster than marathon pace at that time. And I managed to get myself into a group, which is what I always like to do going into a marathon. I just think it helps sort of tick off the kilometers. You don't have to focus too much on the splits yourself if you work together in a group, and it just lowers the perceived effort ever so slightly as well. So I found myself in a group, and I asked the guys in the group, what sort of pace are you aiming for in terms of overall time? And the guys on the front said, if all goes well, we're going to be aiming for 2:18. So I knew at that point, this group that I got myself into, I was feeling good at this time. It was a downhill, but the group was probably moving a little bit fast, or going to move a little bit too fast for me personally with my current fitness. I was aiming for around 2:25. So at that point, After 8 kilometers, I decided that even though I was feeling good, and in previous races I definitely would have stuck with that pack, I consciously made the effort to go to the back and let that group slowly move away from me slightly, just to make sure that I was running to my marathon pace and not allowing that group to dictate how my race went. Because in hindsight, if I'd stuck with the group, I know for a fact I would have blown up a little bit towards the end. The way the course is set out, with the Newton Hills coming after 30 kilometers, if I'd have got there with the group, having worked harder than I needed to work, I think I would have really struggled. And that 8 kilometer point was sort of the most poignant moment in the course for me. I think had I stuck with the pack, as I said, it would have gone tits up. But because I consciously made the effort to run at my pace, I think that's why I had such good success. So from then on in, it was kind of just me and my watch, and I had my watch set up to split every 5 kilometers. So on my watch, I have the distance that I've run in that current lap. So for example, if you're 3 kilometers into the 5k, it would show that on the screen, and then after you go into the second 5k, that distance resets. And I also have the lap pace, so the pace I've run for that 5 kilometers split, and I was just trying to keep that at around 3:25 per kilometer, which I knew would set me up for a great marathon time of around 2:25, which is what I was aiming for. Knowing that the first few kilometers were a little bit faster, had a tiny bit of time in the bank going through the 10k. Probably I had around 40 seconds of added time in the bank because of the way the course is set out. So from 10 kilometers all the way to 30 kilometers, I was pretty much on my own, just making sure I kept to my pace. There was a few guys around me, but we weren't quite running together. Being at the front of the mass participation start, the field sort of strung out quite a lot, and yeah, I found myself running on my own, which usually wouldn't be an ideal situation to be in for a marathon. It's a long way, but yeah, I think it just allowed me to really focus in on my own effort, my own marathon pace, and led me to success over the full distance. When I got to 30 kilometers, the Newton Hills, there's 5 hills in Boston that you have to navigate, and I was feeling, yeah, really, really good. Like almost like I was just out for a normal tempo. So when the hills came, yes, I had to work hard to get up and over them, but because I'd sort of been conscious to save a little bit in the tank, I think I got over those hills quite comfortably, and then yeah, it was about 5 miles into the finish, all sort of downhill after that heartbreak hill, and yeah, it was an incredible race. I remember coming around that final corner on to Boylston Street. You sort of turn left from Hereford Street onto Boylston Street, and yeah, it was incredible. The crowds in America and in Boston were just insane. You're talking like 3 or 4 people deep at every point on the course. When you get to the later stages, there's like 10 people deep, and the sound that you can hear is just ridiculous. You can't even hear yourself breathe, think. It can be a little bit off-putting, I'm not going to lie, but when I let myself embrace it, coming down that last straight, it was unreal. One of my best running moments to date, hands down. It just felt like the whole crowd was behind you, because at that stage I was pretty much on my own. There wasn't somebody in front of me that I could see, and there wasn't really anyone behind me, so it felt like I had that whole sort of final, 500 meters to myself, and it was just, yeah, incredible. A moment I will never forget. After the race, I had a little bit of a mishap with my flights. Got to the airport, there's a 2-hour delay and my flight was cancelled. So I ended up staying 2 days extra in Boston, which actually worked out really well, because it gave me time to go and get my new tattoo. After every marathon PB, I get a tattoo on my leg. I've had a few people ask me why haven't I got a tattoo for Osaka, and I actually had one planned in my diary for the day after I flew home from Boston, but because I missed my flight, I had to stay 2 days extra, I missed my tattoo appointment. So I've still got one to add to the leg from Osaka, which I'm getting in a few weeks' time after having to reschedule it. But yeah, that's a little bit about the race. Here's the medal. My main takeaways from Boston were to run marathons to your pace, or what you feel like marathon pace is on the day. Going into the race, I hadn't set myself the splits. I didn't have splits in my hand that I wanted to hit for each 5 kilometers because the course was so varied. So that's definitely something I'll take forward into the next races. Learn to run to marathon pace rather than marathon effort, rather than pace. And yeah, just enjoy it. Soak up the atmosphere. Try not to get too nervous going into the race. Yes, you trained for months to get to this point, but at the end of the day, the result will look after itself if you've put in the training. So that's a little bit of a Boston Marathon race recap, how I ran 2:24. In terms of moving forward, I don't have any marathons in the calendar planned, but I am thinking about doing one maybe towards the end of the year in either December time or maybe early next year, January, February. For the remainder of the year, I'm going to focus a bit more on the shorter distances. I've got some track 5Ks coming up, and I also want to try and bring my 10K race road time down to around 30 minutes. If I can break sub 30 this year, that would be incredible. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the shorter distances, try and get some bigger races in the calendar, but nothing at the moment. Just taking a few weeks of downtime. Hence why it's taken me a little while to get this video out, because I've just been relaxing, catching up on admin and stuff. But I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who sent me messages before, after. Yeah, it's been a little bit overwhelming over the last few weeks, the amount of support my videos got, the social media, everything I put out on social media has been so well received. So I just want to say a massive thank you. Final shout out goes to Adidas and ProDirect for making this all happen. I would have never have gone to Boston without them. Hope you've enjoyed this recap. Until next time, aspire to run, run to inspire, and we'll see you again soon.